the Fantasy Source Baseball Podcast. My name is David Ayard. I'm sitting here with George Winkler. And today we are continuing our preseason preview series, as it were. And we're going to be talking about shortstops, everyone's favorite position, right?
Well, it was until last year when everybody's favorite players pretty much dropped off the face of the earth.
That is true. That is true. Derek Jeter had by far the worst season of his career. He's everyone's favorite player, right?
Well, he was, and then he goes out and hits 270 last year, which was a career low. But, you know, this guy is the captain. You can't give up on him. If he's there in the round 5 or 6, I might go for him if I miss out on one of the elite choices.
I was actually going to wait on Derek Jeter, but I think that he is the one guy that your snotty, sabermetrically inclined friends are all going to say, he's 36 years old, he's washed up, I wouldn't touch him with a 30-foot pole. At which point I would say, even though I am one of those sabermetrically inclined guys, I would say the guy was an MVP-level player 2 years ago. He's not going to be that anymore. But he might be one of the top 5 shortstops in fantasy baseball. And would you at all be shocked if that happened? Absolutely not.
Absolutely not. I mean, we wrote him off 2 years ago, and then he comes back and has a good year, like you said, an MVP-type year. So, yeah, 100 runs, it's still in the books for this guy. And when you look at what else we're dealing with at this position, it's pretty thin at the top.
Okay, so just say pretty thin at the top. What exactly do you mean by pretty thin at the top?
I'm talking like there's 2 guys.
Okay,
I mean,
who are your 2?
Yeah, Hanley Ramirez and Troy Tulowitzki. Those are the guys you're going to encounter in rounds 1 and 2. And even with Tulowitzki, he has some question marks because he's played in 150-plus games just once in the last 3 seasons. So he's kind of like the Ian Kinsler of shortstop. He's going to give you great production when he's healthy across the board in 5x5 leagues, but can he stay healthy?
Now, did Ian Kinsler take that title away from Brian Roberts? Like basically, you're going to get 120 games, go with it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really hoping we can see what Tulowitzki can do. I mean, he had an incredible September last season, so if he does that over the course of a season, maybe not like September, but a good 5-category producer, you're talking like the upper half of the first round. But just to be safe, you probably pick him in the later half of the first round, second round, because there's still some really good first basemen and outfielders that are a little bit more reliable than
Now, to be totally clear, Hanley Ramirez, in your opinion, is a much better bet than Tulowitzki because he's going to have, he might not have quite the same power numbers that Tulowitzki has playing in Coors Field. He'll definitely have better steals numbers. He'll probably have better batting average numbers. And you know what? Maybe even runs and RBIs depending on how everything shakes out with that team.
Yeah, I mean, Ramirez hit 21 homers last season, which was low for him. He kind of, if you look at his advanced stats, it looked like he lost a little of his patience. Maybe he was chasing some balls outside of the strike zone or getting pitched around. Hopefully, if Mike Stanton can establish himself batting behind Ramirez, maybe he'll start to see a few more pitches to hit maybe in the second half of the season.
Okay, so after those top 2 guys, we already talked about Derek Jeter maybe we both kind of agree he'll be in the top half of the starting shortstops in fantasy baseball, probably. Who else is in that second tier after Hanley and Tulowitzki, and what rounds would you start looking for them if you don't get either of those top 2 guys?
Well, you got Jose Reyes and Jimmy Rollins. These are guys we just can't get rid of when it comes to the first 4 rounds. I mean, no matter what, somebody's going to pick him in the first 4 rounds.
I mean, hasn't Reyes been a top pick for like 6 years now, it feels like?
It feels like, and last year he was relatively healthy for him, but he still only stole 30 bases. So
only 30 bases.
Well, only for him. I mean, we're expecting like 40 or 50 when we go in on him on like the second or third round. So he's a solid option, but maybe not quite elite. And then when you talked about Jimmy Rollins, he got banged up with the ankle injury last year, and that kept him down. But still, we can't get him out of the 4th round because he's still that guy who could hit, 15 homers, steal 30 bases, and that's gold in fantasy.
The tough thing with Rollins that I think of when I think of Derek Jeter and Rollins is that while they're declining, they're still pretty good, and then especially those ballparks can mask some of their real life deficiencies, as it were. They'll still put up the raw numbers, and that's what matters to you in fantasy, is that if they're going to be playing in bandbots, is, you know what, maybe in real life you put them below the Steven Drews of the world or the Alexi Ramirez's of the world, but in fantasy, they're more valuable than those guys.
Well, ballparks and then their lineups they're in,
Yeah,
too.
exactly.
I mean, you know, you can't go wrong with either of those two lineups. They're going to score a lot of runs. And yes, they might be boring. We might have been talking about them for years, but after those elite guys are gone, why not? 4th or 5th round.
Now, I did mention Alexi Ramirez, Steven Drew. To me, they're kind of like the low-rent version of Rollins and Jeter. Like, okay, you didn't get those guys, but okay, we'll get the guys with the same basic skill sets. After that, you start getting into guys that are really, really flawed in some way, shape, or form. And I'm thinking specifically of the Ian Desmond, Elvis Andrus group. We had a bit of a conversation earlier where you were talking about Elvis Andrus and how he has so little power that in your mind, you really discount him.
Well, actually, not in my mind, but in my colleague Matt
Okay,
Latufsky's
Matt Latufsky's mind.
He
Okay.
is really down on him. He's like 0 homers. I'm done with you, buddy. But, you know, I see the 0 homers, but I also see his 35 steals and maybe 90 runs, batting atop a very good Texas lineup. So I'm thinking that if you can achieve balance, pick up the homers elsewhere down the draft, just keep that balance in mind as you're going through the draft. You can survive a pick like Elvis Andrus.
I guess the key is that you don't also get Michael Bourne when you have Elvis Andrus, and you just say to yourself, like, look, I'm taking this one position to aim at steals. You can't go for the similar production in all 5 categories. The same, like, you got to be more balanced out later on in other positions.
I totally agree with you. And when you get down to this level, you're kind of at the level where you're saying, well, you could do a lot worse than Elvis Andrus, or you could do a lot worse than Ian Desmond. And I kind of like Desmond this year because he's a guy who could hit 15 homers, you know, steal somewhere in 15 bases, 15 to 20, and he should be moving up the lineup with the Nationals and get more chances to drive in runs.
Now, in order to wrap this up, we've gone through pretty much an entire first set of shortstops. Is there anybody that you would look at as a potential sleeper off the top of your head, maybe a bounce-back candidate, someone that the casual fantasy player wouldn't necessarily think to even draft?
Well, I don't know. I think that they would think to draft this guy because he's a Cub, and there's a lot of Cubs fans out there. But I like Starlin Castro. I mean, he hit 300 as a 19-year-old, and that's very impressive in the major leagues. And if he can improve his steals, you know, improve his batting average a little bit at 20 years old on opening day, I know that's still pretty young, but I think he could be that sleeper guy that jumps up a little bit.
I would say, just going off of that, thinking about Castro, it's probably better to get a guy a little bit too early than to get a guy too late, I would think, where you say to yourself, you know what, I'm more willing to take a chance that he's going to be great earlier than everybody expects him to be than to guess, oh yeah, this guy will hold on for one more year.
Yeah, and a guy that could be too late this year is Marco Scutaro of the Red Sox. I mean, his OBP dumped last year from the year before with Toronto, and he really benefited from being at the leadoff spot for Boston because they had so many injuries. Well, if he comes back this year, he's probably going to bat ninth, and then, you know, fewer runs. He's not going to average the 95 runs that he's done over the last 2 years.
All right, hey, that's the shortstop preview. George, thanks for joining us.